Amy Morin, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. I had a chance to read your phenomenal book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And I was so excited that you agreed to come on the show. So, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. Happy that you're here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Been doing a lot of research on your work lately. I've heard your story several times, and it's truly a groundbreaking story. And if you would, I'd love for you to kind of take us back 10 plus years ago to the genesis of not only this book, but the what I would call a franchise or a series of other books that you've written. Take me back to what kicked off this book. What got you to write 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do?
Sure. So I'm a therapist. I had started my career as a therapist, and I was living in rural Maine. I'm about 23 at the time. And my mom passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. She had a brain aneurysm. And it was really the first time in my life I thought, okay, well, now it's not just about teaching my therapy clients these skills, but I had to also figure out how am I going to use these skills in my real life? How do you got through painful experiences and come out on the other side? I would see so many people in the therapy office who went through something tough and they felt like their life basically stopped, that they felt stuck, like their life was just never going to be good again. But then I saw other people who would go through these tough times and they grew from it, that they learned from it, and they were still hopeful and optimistic. And I really wanted to know, like, what separates these two people. And one of the things I learned early on was it always wasn't always about what people did. Sometimes it was about what they didn't do. People who didn't have certain bad habits tended to fare better. And that was fairly contrary to what I'd been taught in college. I'm a clinical social worker, so they taught me to figure out what people are doing well and build on their strengths. But I realized, like, if I just told somebody, if I was a physical trainer and I said run on the treadmill, that's great. But if I didn't tell them that the jelly donuts you ate on the way to the gym were counterproductive, then they wouldn't make as much progress as they could. So I thought, okay, it's also about figuring out what not to do. And I applied that to my own life as I went through the grief and the pain of losing my mom. But then on the 3-year anniversary of the day that my mom died, it was 3 years to the day, my 26-year-old husband died of a heart attack. I'd never even heard of anybody having a heart attack at the age of 26. I didn't know it was possible. But just like with my mom, he was here 1 minute and seemed fine, and he was gone the next. And it just did this incredible number on my brain to have two of my favorite people on the planet disappear seemingly in an instant. And it seemed especially cruel that it just happened to be on the anniversary of my mom's death. And I'm supposed to be a therapist who helps other people deal with their problems, but my entire life was flipped upside down and I didn't know which way was up and which way was down or what I was going to possibly do. And so many things. We'd just become foster parents. We'd bought a house. We had all of these goals and dreams and things we wanted to do, but I didn't really have the option of not going to work for a while. They gave me 3 days of bereavement time, and I was able to tap into some short-term disability benefits because my doctor diagnosed me with acute stress disorder. And that bought me a little bit of time, but eventually obviously had to go back. My biggest fear in that moment, though, was then losing my house. We had bought a mortgage together. My husband was a primary breadwinner. And I thought, how am I going to pay the bills on my own? You can only work as a therapist so many hours a week. It wasn't like I could work 120 hours as a therapist and be effective. It wasn't even an option. So I started freelance writing as a side hustle because if I felt like writing in the evenings and on the weekends, I could earn a little bit of money, but I didn't have to. So if I was having a bad day or I just wasn't in the mood, I didn't have to do it. So if I had gotten another part-time job where I had to show up, I don't think I could have done it, but this was optional. So that helped me pay the bills. So I didn't have to also move in the midst of all of this. And a few years later, like I finally figured out which way was up and which way was down. I had worked through a lot of the grief and pain. And I was fortunate enough to find love again. And I got remarried. I got a new house. I got a new job, and life was looking pretty good. But then my father-in-law was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I was just like, this isn't fair. Like, I just spent so many years grieving, and now I have to lose somebody else. Like, why me? And it was just in that moment of this really dark day that I said, all right, I'm going to write myself a list of what mentally strong people don't do. And if I just don't do these things today, I'll get through it. And when I was done, I happened to have 13 things on the list, and I would read it every day. And I found it incredibly helpful. So I put it on the internet, and I thought, well, I might as well put it out there and see if it helps somebody else. I got paid $15 for it, and I thought like 5 people would read it. But 50 million people read it, and one of them happened to be a literary agent who called and said, "Hey, you should write a book." And I didn't even know what a literary agent was, but I just said, "Oh, thank you very much, but no," because the article didn't give any context to why I had written it. So people thought, "You're a therapist, you mastered all of these things." And nobody knew the story behind it. Like, actually, no, I struggle with all of these things. And this was a letter to myself. And I didn't really want to put that out there into the world because I thought it would damage my credibility as a therapist if people thought, "Oh boy, you're teaching us all these skills and look at what you struggle with." So didn't really plan to put that out there, but thought about it. And I thought, well, Amy, if you get a chance to write a book, somebody calls and invites you to do it, you should probably do it. So decided to do it within a year. My first book hit the shelves, and told the backstory of, hey, I actually struggled with these things, and here's why I wrote it. And now it's been 10 years since I wrote that article, and I have 6 books on the shelves, and I get to do cool stuff like talk to you about mental strength all these years later.
Man, what an amazing story. An accidental author is what you call yourself on your website. And I don't think a lot of people can really coin that term accidental author, but you truly are. That's amazing. I want to go back. So a couple tragedies in your life that people don't expect. I think it's perhaps one thing to have a grandparent that is sick and you can kind of see things coming. But for you, it seems like, I've heard you say 24 hours before that, we're at a basketball game having a great time. You really weren't prepared for this stuff. I think when we talk about mental performance and being mentally strong, there's something about having the ability to overcome the unknown or overcome what you weren't quite ready for. I have two questions that I want to get after. The first one is with you losing somebody by the snap of a finger. How has that changed how you treat people now? Do you see things differently? Do you treat people differently? Do you try to have that in the back of your mind? And then second question would be, what are your thoughts or what is a piece of advice for people who need to be a little bit better about overcoming the unknown? Two separate ones. Take those how you want. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm excited. You take which one you want and go for it.
Yeah, it certainly has changed my life in many ways. And one way is if I catch myself saying the word someday, like, "Oh, I'd like to do that someday," I just pause and say, like, "Do you want to do it or not?" Because if you do, don't wait until someday. And that's the reason why I moved from a house in rural Maine to a sailboat in the Florida Keys. My current husband had grown up just like with a sailboat themed bedroom when he was 4, and his dream was to live on a sailboat. And I was like, "Oh, that'd be cool to do someday." But I had a 9 to 5 job. I didn't know anything about sailing or living on a boat. And I remember us having that conversation, and I was like, "Yeah, someday." And as soon as it flew out of my mouth, I was like, "Okay, let's do it." And once I became an author, and I was like, "I don't have a 9 to 5 job anymore. I could write a book from anywhere. Why wouldn't we do it?" And so within a month, we packed our Fiat with a dog and a cat, a laptop, and like 2 articles of clothing, and came to the Florida Keys. He bought the boat. I didn't even see it. I was like, "I don't care what the boat looks like or what kind of boat it is." So, and really thought, "Oh, maybe it'll be 6 months that we live here," but it's been we're on 8 years now. And but it was one of those things that, yeah, like someday isn't promised. So don't put things off until someday because you might not get there. My mom was 51 when she passed away. She had lots of plans in her life that she never got to do. So I think if I have something I want to do, I want to do it now. So that's been one huge change. And I think for somebody who people that struggle with like the uncertainty of life or the not knowing and the strange twists and turns, I think it's about accepting that, practicing radical acceptance that life is bizarre. And don't get me wrong, I'm the kind of person that if I were to read a mystery novel, I read the back page first, right? I really want to know how it ends, and then I can enjoy the book. And or if I'm watching a TV show, like I look to see how it ends because then I can relax. I can't do that with real life. Like I can't figure out what the ending is, and that's probably a blessing because if somebody would have told me like how things were going to end or what was going to happen next, like I wouldn't have been able to enjoy the moment. So I think in the therapy office we talk about radical acceptance. You have options in life. You can say like I have to fix this now, or you can say I'm going to make the best of what I'm dealing with right now. And if what you're dealing with is lots of uncertainty, you can still say, how do I make the best of life given this uncertainty? You don't know what's right around the next corner. But if there's anything I learned in life too, like that, sometimes what's right around the next corner is something amazing. Like I never planned to write a book, but on the worst day of my life, the best opportunity came along. So you just never know, and to hang on, because what could be your darkest days, something amazing might be right around the corner then too.
Would you agree, Amy, that the most mentally strong people out there, while they're in that moment of adversity, they can kind of do two different things. One, they can grieve and they can go through that process, but almost on the other side of the coin, they can also start looking, start backing up and looking. What's the lesson here? Where is there good in this? What can I learn from this? In my opinion, I think that some of the most mentally strong people can do both of those things and try to find the lesson, because that's the difference. I think you and I could go through the same sort of tragedy, event, experience, whatever, but we're both going to come out of it differently. And so some of it is what I'm going to guess is how you just interpret the story. What are you going to pull out of it? Because it's hard to say sometimes, but I think there's always something good to come out of each scenario. There's something, you just got to find it. And if you can find it, that's what's going to separate maybe you from the person next to you. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that even when something awful happens, sometimes we can ask ourselves, like, what lesson did I learn? So you might not say, like, gee, something amazing happened that somebody close to me died. That was
Sure.
awesome because I did this or that. But you could say, like, what lesson did I learn? And it might be that I was stronger than I thought I was. Or it might be that even though I went through that, I found out like I have a lot of people who care about me. And the one caution I say with that is I see a lot of people these days who think that strength is about growing like in an instant. So somebody goes through a tragedy on Monday and Tuesday, they're like, I'm doing so amazing. And they feel pressure to say that. And that I hate the saying, like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That is not true. Like, I, as a therapist, I see so many people who go through tragedy and they're scarred. And that doesn't mean that they're weak people. It means that they're human. And it doesn't have to necessarily make you a better person or a stronger person. It might change you forever and ever. Like, I'm not the same person I was when I lost my mom or when I lost my husband. And so I don't like when people feel pressure to say I grew from it. There's this idea of post-traumatic growth as opposed to post-traumatic stress disorder. And I see so many people that feel pressure to say, like, instantly, like, I grew from that thing, but really they haven't even begun experiencing the pain yet. They're trying to avoid the pain. And so they're insisting, like, no, guys, I'm good. I'm good. Look, um, as a defense mechanism. And they're just trying to act tough through the pain instead of experiencing it. And things like grief are the process by which you heal. You have to go through the painful experiences to heal. So you don't have to ask yourself right away, what did I learn from this the next day? But sometimes it might not be until years down the road that you could say, gosh, what did I learn from that one experience? And if you take just a bit of meaning from that, and it might be like, I learned that my neighbor cared about me more than I thought that they did. Just knowing that can sometimes help people come out of something without being quite as scarred, or that they can at least say, yes, I wish that hadn't happened to me, um, but because it did, here's the outcome. And I know for me, like, obviously people will say sometimes, like, that's so good, got to write a book because you went through so many awful things. Well, trust me, it's not a trade-off. If I could go back and and not have to write a book, I would do that in an instant. It didn't undo the pain that I went through, but it is something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I wouldn't be here. I'd probably still be in rural Maine working with people in my therapy office on a one-on-one basis. So while I'm not thrilled that all of that had to happen to get to where I am today, the reality is, because of it, I get to do some stuff that I wouldn't have done before.
It seems now more than ever we live in this world, Amy, that more is better, more, and grind and do all this extra. And the title of your book is what really drew me in. The 13 things mentally strong people don't do. I think there's, as a mental performance coach, there's sometimes really enlightening conversations when we polarize things instead of adding on, do this, add this to your routine, boom, 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 boom. There is some sort of a different kind of a look when you see the word "don't do." I thought this was really cool. Why did you talk about what you shouldn't do versus adding on doing more of this? And maybe why should we as listeners look at life as more of things that we should maybe take away versus add on to our plate?
So many people come into my therapy office and they had a million and one good habits, but they felt like their habits weren't effective. And it was because they sometimes just had like one or two things that they were doing that were counterproductive. And I knew in my own life, I was feeling like I didn't know which way was up and which way was down, the easiest thing to do was just be like, subtract something. I didn't want a list of here's 100 things to do today, but if I just said, don't do this thing today and you'll be okay, somehow that seemed easier. But essentially, what I was seeing people do, if I were to put it, a lot of times when we talk about mental strength, it's easier to talk about it in terms of like physical strength and physical health because that's more tangible. But essentially, people were like, I just ate a bunch of fried chicken, but as long as I have a salad with it, then it's okay to eat the fried chicken. And you're like, no, if you're trying to be healthy, just cut out an extra couple pieces of fried chicken and then you can be healthy, but you don't have to like choke down this salad that you hate and then think that that's going to outdo the damage from the fried chicken. And the therapy office, that's what people were doing is they were like, I have these 25 self-care things that I'm doing, and yet they were in a toxic relationship. They had a job that they hated, and yet they're like, but then I practice gratitude for 10 minutes a day. And it didn't matter because all of the other things they had going on in life were just so damaging that it wasn't about adding more. And they were coming into therapy like looking for more lists of things to do in hope to give them, and they could finally do enough or be enough that would undo the other things in life and that they'd finally feel like they were good enough.
Do you think it's easier for people to add things to their list versus subtract? Is that something that's like people they get a joy out of adding something? I'm trying this new habit. I'm on this new challenge versus, hey, I'm dropping something. I'm giving up something.
Yeah, it's been drilled into us for so long about adding things to our lives. So somebody's like, okay, I added, I go to the gym now and I do this and I do that. And you can brag about that, right? Like you have something to tell people, I'm working on this and I'm doing that. It's much more difficult and it's not so glamorous to say, hey, I'm trying not to do this thing, whether it's I'm trying to not complain about people or I'm trying to not spend too much time feeling sorry for myself. It's not as fun to tell somebody that you're working on that, but at the same time, one of the most effective things you could do. So, but I do think there is that pressure. We like a star chart where we can say, did I do this today? And here you go. And it's very tangible and you feel good about yourself. But did I eat 3 apples this week? Yes. And you see it on the chart as compared to, did I avoid eating cookies and cake? It's a little bit more difficult to keep track of.
Sure. Before we get into some of the nuances of the book, there's one other piece I think that's important as we lay the foundation. It's the difference between mental toughness versus mental strength. When I'm working with a new athletic team, this is something that I go over too. So I think we're speaking a lot of the same language because I think the word mental toughness, although people like you and I are trying to kind of move that out of the space, it still is very prevalent, especially with coaches and people at certain age levels. Talk to me about the difference between mental strength versus mental toughness. What are people still getting wrong about these two words?
So, when I hear people talk about mental toughness, I don't know, I hear it described in many, many different ways, depending on who's coining the latest phrase or term. But when people, I think, hear the word toughness, they think about acting tough. So you sprained your ankle, yet you finished the game, and we get applauded for that. Or you showed up at work even though you were not feeling well. That's amazing that you just did that. Or you had something tragic happen on Monday, and by Friday you're back to quote unquote normal. Like people get applauded for that. And there are all these sayings that sort of reinforce it. And sometimes the word gets misused too, where people will say, like, check on your strong friends. To which I would argue, no, if they're your strong friends, they're already talking about their feelings. They aren't the ones who are acting as if they don't care. That would be acting tough. And so, in terms of acting tough, it's when people are like, I don't cry at funerals, and you just push all of your feelings down. Usually, the only one you show is anger. And other than that, you pretend like nothing bothers you, deny any kind of pain. It's the people that say stuff like, failure isn't an option. Of course it is. Everybody fails, and you should be failing. Failure is proof that you're trying, or you never quit. No, we should be quitting things all the time. If you put your time into something and it's not working and you decide it's not in line with your values, quit. By all means, quit. But I see so many people that think that, forcing yourself to do something despite the pain and the fact that maybe it's not even in line with your life is somehow admirable. And we get applauded for it, for pushing ourselves to the limits all the time, for thinking that it's okay to do all of these things and despite the cost. I still occasionally see people on social media bragging about the fact that they only get 4 hours of sleep or that they hit the gym by 3 a.m. Um, but to know like taking care of yourself is a sign of strength, and being a kind and empathetic person, living according to your values, being able to acknowledge that you have weaknesses. I mean, that takes courage to somebody, actually, I struggle with this, or I'm not good at that, or asking for help. I think when people act tough, there's a lot about pretending like you have it all together and you don't need anybody in life, but we're supposed to be social creatures. So mental strength is about saying, hey, I'm struggling with this. How about you? Admitting that you're not perfect, and just acknowledging that I am a human being with flaws and I'm also okay with that. I can practice self acceptance with self improvement at the same time, as opposed to trying to pretend like we're perfect.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm strong enough to ask for help. I'm strong enough to say, "Hey, I'm not doing so well." It's framing it almost that way, Amy. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Because you think about it again, like, does it take more courage to say, hey, I'm struggling over here, I'm stressed out? Like, yes, it's much easier to just smile and be like, I'm good. So yeah, I think asking ourselves, question, like, what does it take more strength to do? Asking for help, admitting those things, acknowledging our feelings, definitely.
When I'm working with a group and I'm polarizing mental toughness, I use the word mental flexibility. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I use the word mental flexibility because I think the most mentally strong people in the world, they're very flexible, right? If adversity hits, they can kind of change their route a little bit. Or, hey, a flat tire happens. I didn't plan for this, but I'm going to be flexible. I really like that word flexible because it just shows that I'm not rigid, I'm not really tight, and I'm not really structured. I can move, I can adapt to the whatever circumstance or environment that I'm in. Is that something that you would align with? Is mental flexibility a part of mental strength? Would you have anything that you'd want to add to that word?
I absolutely agree. We talk about it in terms of sometimes like mental agility. Same thing. You have to be able to be flexible. You encounter a problem, our brain usually solves problems in the very same way, no matter what problem it is. And you think, no, actually, the problem you're having with your coworker versus a problem you're having with your friend, you might solve them very differently, or the solutions might be different. And there's a lot of things out there about the importance of consistency and routine and having structure to your day. And while all of that is important, we also know from the research, if we become too rigid, then our plans completely crumble at the first sign of any kind of adversity. If I say, I go to the gym at 5 a.m. every day, and then tomorrow something comes up and I can't go at 5 a.m., but I'm rigid about it, then I'm like, well, I couldn't go to the gym today. When you're flexible, you're like, okay, I couldn't go at 5 a.m., but maybe I can go for a walk during my lunch break, or I'll go after work. And they seem like really small things, but we know this is very true with any kind of habit change people are trying to make, or any kind of people encounter. The more rigid we are, the more fragile our ability to do those things becomes. So you have to be flexible in knowing that, okay, this is like plan A, but there's also going to be a plan B and a plan C. But so often the mentality is, burn the boats. Don't do any, if you have plan A doesn't work, you don't need a plan B. I don't know why people say that, because obviously in life, like most things do not go as planned. And it's so important to have a plan B, to know that, like, if I had planned to do this and this doesn't work, what am I going to do instead? And it could be those little things that you weren't planning for. It might be something like you're in the soccer game and the opponent is playing in a completely different way than you expected. So what are you going to do about it? It could be those things, but it's also when you thought this is going to be my new business plan, it's not working out. What do you do instead? And for people that aren't flexible, which we know a lot of people struggle with this, everything crumbles and then they feel like life fell apart because they're trying to still force something to work even though it's not working.
It's awesome. I would love to hear before we get into some of the nuances. What's another misconception that people have about mastering your mental strength? Is there another myth or misconception that you hear often in your practice or on podcasts or interviews that you'd want to bring to the surface?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones would be that like mental strength is synonymous with mental health. So sometimes people will be like, I wish I could be mentally strong, but I have depression. Or I want you to get rid of my anxiety so that I could be a mentally strong person. But again, if we brought it back to physical strength and physical health, it makes a lot more sense. Like, you could go to the gym and you can lift weights and you'll get big muscles. Yes. That doesn't mean you won't ever get a physical health problem. You might still have high cholesterol. And that doesn't make you a weak person. In that case, we're like, oh, it's probably genetics. Or we can easily say, oh, maybe you need to tweak your diet a little bit. Same as can be said for mental strength. You can do all of these exercises, and if you develop a mental health problem like depression or anxiety, it doesn't mean that you're a weak person. It just means you're struggling with a mental health issue. And it complicates it. It might make it harder to do mental strength exercises, but it's 100% possible. So you can be a mentally strong person while you're still battling a mental health issue. In fact, some of the strongest people I've ever met were the ones who were battling something like that. And yet here they are every day, still working and trudging forward and still saying, I'm going to do these things, even though maybe it's even harder for me than it might be for somebody who isn't battling one of these mental health issues.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm also a personal trainer, a CrossFit coach, so I'm in the gym space, Amy. And some of the things that I hear on maybe not so mentally strong people is that they put labels on themselves. And you kind of said one already. They label their identities. Oh, I have depression, so I can't be this, or I'm old, so I can't do that. And the label, as a mental performance coach and as a fitness coach, it's really hard to break through labels. Once you label yourself as something, it's like wall goes up and I can't do whatever you're telling me to do because this is who I am. There's layers, there's identities. It's a pretty big topic, I would imagine, especially in your field of work. But talk to me about the limitation you put on yourself when you put a label on yourself, even if the label is somewhat true.
Yeah, it's funny. We have these core beliefs about ourselves. Sometimes it's the labels we've given ourselves. Sometimes it's the labels somebody else gave us, maybe when you were 7. And how then we feel like that's my identity, so we live up to that label. When I was 7, 6, 7, 8, all the way until I was, I don't know, 25, everybody labeled me as shy. Every report card I ever had said things like she's painfully shy, she never speaks in class. And if you want to make somebody who's shy talk even less, keep reminding them how shy they are. And so for me, that became who I was. So I did not talk in class. I didn't even in college. I never raised my hand. Public speaking was my number one fear for years. And it just got reinforced. And that was definitely not only how I identified, but how other people identified me. So my friends were not shy, so they all spoke for me, or I had an older sister who spoke for me. So of course, even to this day, I'm not shy anymore, but my sister will still like speak for me just out of habit from when we were little kids. And that's because it's so hard sometimes to shed the label for yourself. And then if other people still see you in a certain way, it's really difficult. And so somebody who maybe grew up overweight as an adult, when they're no longer overweight, they still see themselves as that person. And they really struggle to say, no, I can do these things now, or I don't have to be self-conscious about doing these physical things, or I can go on an airplane now and I don't feel like I used to, but at the same time, I'm in my mind, I'm still afraid. And and we have to chip away at those beliefs sort of slowly but surely. And part of that becomes with just realizing, all right, I call myself this name, or I refer to myself that way. And then doing what we call behavioral experiments. You try doing something slightly different. So if you say I can't do this because I have depression, it might be about saying like I have depression and I'm going to try this anyway. And putting yourself out there and saying, well, let's see if it works. When people come into my therapy office and say something like, I know therapy is not going to work, you're right. It's not. If you are 100% convinced it's not going to work, I guarantee you, you're absolutely right. And so many things in life like that, that we decide I'm not the kind of person who could do that because I am, and you fill in the blank, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the things that we do to reinforce it, again, it's not like we set out to say, hey, I'm going to make sure I sabotage this, but ultimately that's what we do. As a shy person, when I would walk into a room, I didn't talk to anybody because I'm like, I don't really want to be uncomfortable. So I sit in the corner, and then guess what? Nobody talks to me. And then guess what? Then I'm like, see, nobody talks to me because I'm too shy. And it would just get reinforced over and over. And so, but if you say, all right, I'm going to walk into a room and I'm going to introduce myself to 5 people and strike up a conversation, even though that feels uncomfortable, well, then people start to talk to you and you think, oh, maybe I'm more capable and competent than I thought I was. And it's really about that, about teaching ourselves, like your brain will underestimate you and it will give you these labels, or it will make these labels stick for as long as you allow them to. But you can figure out, how do you act contrary to those labels sometimes. And it's funny too, because on the flip side, we often don't want to give ourselves the positive labels. Like somebody who starts running every day, it might take them years before they'll say, well, I'm a runner, right? Instead, they're like, I'm somebody who tries to run 1 mile every 2 days. But if you then put that positive label on there, like I'm a runner, then it goes back to what we talked about before. If I try to run before breakfast one day and the next day I'm not able to, so then I can run at lunch because I'm a runner. It's not like I'm somebody who hates getting up in the morning and going for a jog, but I'm a runner, so I will find time to run. So if we were, I think, more conscious about how to use those labels in a way that would propel our success, we could make a lot more progress.
Oh man, I love that. One of my friends who's a performance coach, he says it in when it comes to defying or going through labels is asking the question, is it true? Said by who? Is it true? Said by who? And sometimes as a coach, it's really hard to break through these labels, right? And there's people that are saying this is who I am. Well, is that actually true? And they, not, I don't know, maybe. And who said that? Where did that come from? And that, sometimes I'm just trying to give applicable pieces of advice for coaches out there. Those two questions can be very enlightening. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And then when you really trace it back to like, why do I think this about myself? And we're different in different environments. So if just because your gym coach said something about you in the eighth grade doesn't mean it's true as an adult. Like, no, actually, like I didn't want to play floor hockey, and that's why I looked unathletic. But at the age of 35, maybe you can still run a marathon, and to find those exceptions to the rule. So when you think something about yourself, like if somebody says, I'm terrible at math, I'd like you to find 5 times you actually surprised yourself when it came to math. Maybe you did a great job on your taxes last year, or you solved this puzzle, or you got an A in geometry, but you really struggled with algebra. But just looking at the exceptions to the rule sometimes can help us break that down and say, all right, it's not 100% true all the time.
It seems like just listening to you for the last couple weeks and this morning, Amy, is that one of the things you're trying to really help people do is find the wins in their life. Is that something that you really pride yourself in for per se? Is helping people see the wins and seeing the positives? Is that something that's powerful and that's on your heart?
It is. So you'd think, as the person that talks about what not to do, that I'd only be focused on the problems. But one of the most powerful things we can do sometimes is find that exception to the rule. And like in therapy, we'll call it solution focused therapy. So if somebody comes in and says, gosh, I struggle with this problem, we'll often say, like, what's the day that you didn't struggle with that thing? And somebody might be like, well, 2 years ago, I had this one day where somebody did this and I realized that I'm better than I think I am. Wow. Well, what happened that day? Or we'll talk about the future. Like in the future, if you woke up tomorrow and there was a miracle and you weren't struggling with this thing anymore, we'll take anxiety, for example. Like, what would you be doing? And the person might say, well, if I didn't have anxiety, I'd leave the house and I'd call some friends and we'd go out for coffee. And just having that conversation of like, what would you be doing differently? Sometimes then motivates people. They might be like, all right, well, I'm going to call a friend tomorrow and see what happens. And for people to know, like, you might still be struggling with something, but you don't have to let it rule your entire life. How can you have a good life anyway? And there's something called acting as if. So if somebody says, gosh, I have so much anxiety, well, how might you be doing things differently if you acted like you were brave? Or if people come into my therapy office all the time and say, like, I want to go back to college, but I don't have any confidence. So I need you to help me build confidence so I can go to college. But the truth is, like, if you want to go back to college, that's one of the best ways to build confidence. You go back to college at the age of 30 and crush it, you'll feel much more confident about yourself. So let's act as if you felt confident today and see what happens. And the same could be said for sports. If you walk into a situation and you think, oh, I'm really outnumbered here. I don't even belong. Everybody else is so much better than I am. And so, well, all right, well, what if I went into this situation confident? How would I be acting? And change your behavior first, and often the feelings will follow.
Love it. It's one of the eight most powerful words in mental performance is act as if it were impossible to fail. Act as if it were impossible to fail. What would that look like? When we talk about confidence and building confidence, especially with the group I'm working with, mostly high school students, that's something that I use quite often. Act as if it were impossible to fail. What would that look like? What would the most confident person, what would the most confident Amy look like on the soccer field? Well, I'd have big body language. I'd say this, and you paint that picture of what does the most confident person look like, and then they can live that out.
Yes, and then when we start to change our behavior, I mean, we know our performance improves, and for people to know, like, a little bit of self-doubt is normal and it's healthy and it's actually good for you. If we were to look at two competitors, the one who's 100% confident all the time actually performs a little worse than the one who says, I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to do today. So that people, because I hear that a lot, people are like, you have to eliminate all self-doubt. But you don't have to. Sometimes knowing, like, I have a little bit of self-doubt and yet I'm going to try to be as confident as I can is the healthiest strategy. If we looked at two golfers, the one who says, I'm going to win 100% all the time, doesn't practice as much, they don't keep their head in the game, as compared to the person who says, I'm going to have to try really hard. And or we know that with students. The person who says, I'm going to ace the test on Friday doesn't study. The person who says, I'm going to have to work hard to do well on the test because I'm not sure I can get an A, studies harder and then does better. So then you ask, like, how do you fuel? How do you use your self-doubt to fuel yourself, to practice harder, keep your head in the game, and then ultimately do better?
This is great. I want to get into some of the 13 items. I have a couple of my favorites, but I want to start with your favorite. And it's number one. You say, don't, mentally strong people, don't waste time feeling sorry for yourself. I was a little surprised that this was number one and your favorite, but after reading it, it was like, this makes a lot of sense. Talk to me about number one and why you love it so much and why it is number one.
So we kept the book the same with the letter that I wrote myself. And in that moment that I wrote the letter, that's where I was, is feeling sorry for myself, that this isn't fair. I shouldn't have to keep losing people. And like, being sad is healthy. That means you're honoring something that you lost, but feeling sorry for yourself is different. It's when you exaggerate how bad your situation is. It's when you underestimate your ability to cope. It's when you start to think that things are going to be horrible forever. And when we start to do that, we get stuck in this cycle where you think life is awful, it'll never get better. And then we become hopeless and helpless, and you don't actually do anything to make life better. And you can always do something to manage your feelings, to manage a situation, to make something a little bit better in life every day. But when we feel sorry for ourselves, we're just so convinced that there's nothing we can do that we don't even put in any effort. And then because we aren't putting in any effort, life does get bad and it stays bad. And I would see this as a therapist too. People would say, I want to change my life. But then every week they wanted to come in and tell me about all the horrible things that happened in the past seven
Yes.
days.
Yes.
And then they'd come back the next week and want to tell me how horrible life was without taking any action. And so this was really at the top of my list because I wanted people to know that, again, no matter how bad things are, there's always some kind of action that you can take. And it might be something small, but it's important to do something so that we don't lose hope, or so that we don't feel like we're doomed for the rest of our lives.
So one of the way when I'm coaching mental performance, Amy, and I'm talking about the victim mentality, and I think that's kind of what you're talking about here is feeling sorry for yourself, is having that victim mindset. I have this hierarchy where victim is at the bottom, and then I put what's at the top, the curious competitor. And I talk to athletes, so I put the word competitor on it. And I'm a big believer in staying curious and asking questions and staying curious as long as you can. I think that's why I found myself in the podcasting world. To me, one way to get people out of the victim mentality or to get people out of feeling sorry for themselves is to ask themselves questions. What can I do? What have I learned from this? Posing, maybe taking yourself outside the box and looking at it from a bird's eye view versus I'm so inundated I can't even see 3 inches outside of my face. So I think that, to me, that's one strategy that I would come up with. How do you help people? I think you talked about a little bit about what can you do? What's one thing you can do? You try to find action. Is that the strategy, or do you have another strategy also to go with how to pull people out of that victim mentality? If we're speaking the same language, I hope we are.
Yeah, yeah, we certainly are. And that's part of it. So in the therapy, obviously, I say, like, what's one thing you could do this week? And maybe you do have an incredibly difficult week ahead. And we know that you've got bills that are piling up and you are have some medical issues, and those are reality. But at the same time, what could you do? And for some people, it might be something as like, I'm in a rough situation and I'm going to send a kind text message to 2 people today. Because if I can at least do something to perhaps make the world a brighter place, I'm going to do that. Or I'm going to go on Instagram and I'm going to comment on 2 strangers' profiles, maybe my favorite musician and my favorite author. And I'm just going to say something nice and put out some positive vibes into the world. Might be as simple as that. Or for somebody who says, I'm drowning in debt, what do I do? It might be like, let's just start piling up, making a budget and figuring out how much money you have and where to spend it, and the first thing you're going to do. And another strategy is to just look at it from a different perspective. Like, you can be the victim of a story, but you could also be the hero of the story. And knowing I went through rough stuff and yet I survived is a much different story than I had all this horrible stuff that happened to me and there was nothing I could do about it. And sometimes it's a slight shift in the story, and then knowing, okay, maybe there were some other heroes of your story too. A teacher that was kind to you, a coach that really cheered you on once, or a cousin that called you on one of the worst days of your life. and knowing that there are multiple heroes in your story, but knowing that you weren't a completely helpless and hopeless victim the whole time, but that whatever it is you've survived so far makes all of us a hero. Everybody's life is tough at times. And just remembering that, it's an incredibly powerful mental strength exercise, is you just think, what's the worst thing I've been through and how did I get through it? You have inner strength and resources that you never even knew existed, but I guarantee it got you through something before. And whatever you face right now, it can get you through that too.
I love it. So, what I'm hearing is that staying curious, finding one thing that you can do today, small actions, and then finding the heroes kind of in your journey or in your story. Those three could be a great kind of pieces of advice for you to help yourself to get out of the victim mindset, or maybe to help somebody else get out of the victim mindset as well. Would you agree with that? Stamp your approval on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy to say, what are we going to do? And in the book, I tell this story. We were approaching what would have been my husband's birthday. It was a few months after he had passed away. And I remember saying to my mother-in-law, like, what are you going to do that day? Because I didn't really want to stay home from work and stare at the walls. But on the other hand, I didn't really want to go to work and be a therapist because I didn't think I could be effective. So we said, let's go skydiving. And we spent the day like jumping out of an airplane and said, my husband had been this adventurous guy who loved to do all of these things about life, but that was our way of saying, let's not feel sorry for ourselves on that one day out of the year. And to this day, we still do stuff like we took flying trapeze lessons, we swam with sharks, and
Oh wow,
we try to do something to honor his memory on that day so that it
very cool.
doesn't feel like this horrible, awful day where I sit on the couch feeling sorry for myself.
I love that. I want to go into what my favorite number on the book is. It's number 4. It's mentally strong people don't focus on things that they can't control. This lesson alone changed my life when I was introduced to it in 2016 when I picked up the book The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday,
Mm.
and getting into there's this concept. I just hadn't been taught this before. And it's so simple, Amy, that it's like, how the heck does everybody not understand this or know this? And so, in my 7th skill or my framework, my second skill is focus and awareness, and trying to teach kids to focus on what you can control. And not only focus on what you can control, but master what you can control. I think it's one thing to think about what you can control, but master those items. And so, for me, this is like everybody needs to know. If I had to shout something on the rooftop, this would be it. Talk to me a little bit more about what's your view on focusing on things that you can't control.
Yeah, it's so easy sometimes to worry about what other people are going to do, whether it's like the competitor on the soccer field and how good they are, or we focus on like a relative who's going to show up at your party and you think, are they going to misbehave? Are they going to bring up politics? Are they going to do something outlandish? And when we put our energy into those things, like we have very little energy left over to say, what am I going to do to focus on myself and what can I control? You can always control your attitude, you can always control your behavior, you can control how you respond to your emotions, how you respond to the thoughts that run through your head. And there's always something that we can control. And it's in my parenting book, actually. I share a story of kids that are subjected to incredibly painful cancer treatments, and they have to go through scans and do all of these tests and needles, and there's really not much they can control. And a lot of them don't even understand why people are holding them down and making them do these things. But they found that when they taught them breathing exercises, the kids reported their pain levels shifted dramatically because that was one thing they could control. I could control whether I take a deep breath, whether I hold it for 3 seconds, whether I don't. And I always go back to, if a 7-year-old who's undergoing a painful cancer treatments and scans can find something they can control, all of us can do it in the moment. And it might just be the thoughts that run through your head or the breathing that you do. But as soon as you shift your focus to what can I control right now, everything else changes. Suddenly, things don't feel so scary anymore. They're not as frustrating. We feel like, all right, I have some power in this world. And we start to then think about the actions we could take moving forward and the ability we have to create change.
One of the most simple yet liberating exercises that I've done, and I really think this is applicable for adults and then also obviously for student athletes, is grabbing a blank piece of paper. You've talked about this before, line down the middle. What are the things in your world or your sport or your school or whatever scenario you want to talk about? What's in your control or what's outside of your control? And keeping that piece of paper nearby. Because I think sometimes when we hit adversity or we hit a problem or an issue, we tend to forget maybe if it's inside or outside. So it's almost like this hidden scorecard or this kind of this cheat sheet, but bringing kids specifically that 14 to 18-year-old through that exercise, I tell you what, after 8 to 10 weeks of working with somebody, I'll ask them, "Hey, what was the best thing we've done?" We've done a lot of stuff. Every single time, it was identifying what was inside and outside of my control, and all I had was a simple piece of paper, and so sometimes I think the most simple exercises are also the most liberating.
Yeah, I love that because it is. It's something I don't know why we're not taught this. Like as kids, nobody teaches us this. We learn all about so many other things, and nobody sits down and says, "Yeah, I can control how much I study for the test. I can't control the questions that are going to be on the test, or I can control how much I practice for the game, but I can't control how amazing my competition is or what the weather is that day." But just knowing that somehow does, it's scary at first, but it frees us up. And we know from the research that the more we focus on things we can't control, the more anxious we become. And then the more anxious we become, the more we desperately try to control the environment. And it's this cycle that can be tough to break. So if we teach people just focus on what you can control, it's incredibly liberating once you get over that hump of, yeah, but it's terrifying at the same time. And then you start to go into situations thinking about that. Okay, my job isn't to make sure nothing bad happens. My job is to make sure that I do X, Y, and Z, or my job is to do my best and I can't control how everybody else behaves. Suddenly life becomes a lot better for people when they make that shift.
I had another one circled, and actually, now that we're talking about this, I think it really parlays over into the next one, number 5. Don't worry about pleasing everyone. We talk about things that you can and can't control. We can't control other people. For athletes, you can't control who's on the other side of the field. You can't control your coach. You can't control people that are in the stands. So I think the 4 and 5 kind of relate to each other here. So talk to me a little bit more about don't worry about pleasing everyone. Why was that important to throw on your list?
So we know that from the research that people pleasers struggle the most with reaching their goals in life. And it's because they give away so much all day long that by the end of the day, they have nothing left to give themselves. And there's strange things that people pleasers do, and they don't even realize they're doing it. If you took a people pleaser who says, I'm going to start managing the food that I eat. I want to reduce my calories. But you put them across from somebody with a bowl of M&Ms and the other person's still eating M&Ms, they will match that person M&M for M&M almost every single time because they don't want the other person to feel bad that they're eating junk food. So then you join them. And this kind of stuff happens all the time, or people will say, I'm just mentally exhausted. More often than not, it's because they spend so much energy thinking when somebody says, hey, what do you want to do today? It's not what do I want to do? It's what do I think you want me to say? So they spend all of this time doing all of these mental gymnastics, trying to say, how do I come up with something that will be pleasing to you as opposed to what I actually want? Or it might be something simple like, what do you want for lunch today? Like, I actually want Mexican, but I know you like Chinese food. So let me see if I can put that out there. And then they say yes to all sorts of things that they don't want to do. And then they just don't physically have the time to then say, okay, if I'm doing all of these things that I think will make other people happy, then what is it that will make me happy? And a lot of people don't even know the answer to that question anymore because they've put in so much time trying to make other people happy that they've lost sight of what are my values? What's important to me? And what do I actually want in life?
I think I circled this one because I think this is the one I struggle with most, Amy. To me, this is who I am. And I like to consider myself more empathetic. So I'm thinking about other people. And that maybe that's why I'm reasoning myself on why perhaps I'm a people pleaser. But there's a lot of information in there that I think is really helpful for me that we can't control how they feel. I'm the type of guy to be real vulnerable with you. We'll be out to eat with family, extended family. And I really, it's important to me that everybody's meal is on time, everybody's having a good time, and if they're not, then I kind of feel this like, ah, gosh, you didn't pick the right place, or and so that to be just put myself out there first and foremost, this is something I struggle with.
Yeah, and again, I come by this list honestly because that was something I've struggled with for a lot of my life. And then it was like a light bulb moment where I'm like, I'm actually not that important. If somebody invites me to do something and I say no, thank you, like that's actually a much kinder thing to do than to be like, okay, and then I don't want to go. And like, and then drag myself there, like, no, Amy, like you're not so important that somebody can't handle a no from you, or that I can't or that it would ruin somebody's day or their week if I said, actually, I'm not going to do that, but thank you for the invite. And that it's a much better thing to then say, actually, I don't like that. This is what I like better. Next time we do something, do this or that. And just making those suggestions, I think, takes pressure off from other people who then like, oh, okay. Personally, I like people who are upfront. When somebody can say, actually, no, I'm not doing that. Great. Now I don't feel like, did you really want to go or did you feel obligated because I
So
asked you
true.
to? Like I thoroughly enjoy people that can be all, no.
The other one I wanted to go to before we close down was number 9, don't resent other people's success. And the reason why I want to go through this is because I found myself underlining the most text on this page. You talked about a story about a guy named Peter Bookman. And this story, I read it and then I had to read it to my wife because I was like, holy crap, I couldn't believe this. And then the way he responded. Do you remember the story and would you mind kind of sharing it with my audience?
Oh, yeah. So it's been a while. I remember Peter well. It's been a while since I wrote the book. Um, but if I recall, it was a business thing, and Peter had there was a lot of money at stake, and Peter just wasn't angry that this other company had essentially I think taken his idea, done some things without him, cut him out of the business. And he was still able to be happy for them, which I think is a tough thing to do. For a lot of us, we think, no, like not only is it tough sometimes to be happy for our competitors or to not be resentful of them, but if you helped build something and then you get cut out of it, whether it's a team that you were on or you get cut out of a business thing, to then like cheer somebody on and you're thinking, no, but I helped build this from the ground up, it would be incredibly tough to do. But that was what Peter was able to do.
Yeah, so to put a button on it, he said, in fact, Fusion IO went on to become a $1 billion business, earning the founders $250 million after Peter left. Rather than resenting his former company's success, Peter feels happy for them. He acknowledges that a lot of people have told him he should be angry and how the company he started with on to be so successful without him. When I asked him why he doesn't harbor any animosity, he said, quote, I don't see how their success robs me of anything. I am happy to have played my part and look forward to helping others achieve their dreams, regardless of whether the outcomes ends up in my best interest or not. I'd underline that because I was like, wow, powerful to be able to say that. It's one thing if somebody, goes is a starter and you're on the second string and you're excited for them, but $250 million, oh, that's a different story.
Right. And how often do we have that opposite mentality of thinking that somebody else's success robs us of our own and thinking, well, if you go on and do something amazing without me, then somehow it means you took my share. And in today's world of social media, I mean, when I wrote the book, TikTok and Instagram wasn't really a thing, but now that it is, I think it's tougher than ever. We look at other people and we're like, oh, they have this many followers, they have this much money. Look at the awesome vacation they went on. And it's much tougher to then say, and so what? I don't have to, that doesn't rob me of my ability to do those things.
There's a quote that I think was on my podcast at some point. I've done so many, but somebody said a good way to self-talk, kind of a good way to come back on something like that is say, good for them, not for me. Good for them,
Yeah.
but that isn't for me. And so that's something that's just always been kind of ringing in my head of something to say when you might feel a little bit of jealousy, but then you kind of think like, you know what? I wouldn't even want that life. I mean, so good for them, not for me. Amy, as we close down, I want to ask you a question that I don't think you've been asked before. It's if you had to add a number 14 to this amazing book, look, knowing what you know now 10 years later, what would be number 14 on the things that mentally strong people don't do?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see. I was able to do it for my women's book. We had like a Target special edition. And so for the women's book, there's like a secret number 14 for that book, but we never had one for this book. Um, I might say something along the lines of emotions, which is kind of weaved in the book in the other chapters, but I might say something to the effect of like mentally strong people don't let their emotions make the final decisions. Because I think we do our best when we uh, balance our emotions with some logic. And sometimes knowing that we have the ability to raise our logic and reduce intense feelings is important. So that might be the 14th thing if I had to put one in there.
I love that. Is there a strategy that you like to use to help people get to that logical brain?
Yeah, sometimes it goes back to what we said earlier about making a list. So when somebody says, I'm really excited about this get rich quick scheme, we often think like excitement's a great emotion. Well, there is a downside. If somebody offers you $1 billion with $100 investment today, you might want to write down, and here are 10 reasons why that might not work. Or when somebody says, I really want to go to the gym every day, but yet I get out of work and I'm tired, so I go home right afterwards. We might put, here's the top 10 reasons why you should go to the gym, and you tape it to your steering wheel. So that even though you feel tired and you're talking yourself out of it, you read that list from yourself, you talk yourself into it. So I think when it comes to emotions, a good thing is to just write things down. The top 10 list of your own can talk you into something, and or talk you out of a bad decision.
Amy Morin, ladies and gentlemen, what a treat this was. Amy, how can my followers and my listeners support you, or if you want to talk a little bit about your books, the platform or the mic is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have 6 books. Starts with 13 things mentally strong people don't do, and then there's a parenting book, a book for women. There's a workbook, a kids book now too for the 8 to 12-year-old range, and I have a couples book is my most recent one. And I have a podcast called Mentally Stronger with therapist Amy Morin, where I give out mental strength exercises every week, and we interview guests who share how they stay mentally strong, given whatever hand they were dealt. And my website, where you can find all that info, is Amy Morin, LCSW, is in licensed clinical social worker.com.
Amy, this was so fun. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you, DJ. This has been great.